Imagine standing on stage, knowing every breath might be your last. Imagine singing to thousands while inside, your body is breaking down. Would you continue? Would you fight? Freddie Mercury did. This is not just a story about a rock star. This is a story about what it means to be truly alive, even when death is knocking at your door. Let me take you back to 1987. Freddie Mercury was at the top of the world. Queen had just performed at Live Aid 2 years earlier, a performance many call the greatest rock show in history. Millions knew his voice. Millions loved him. But there was something they didn't know. Something Freddie was hiding. In a quiet doctor's office, away from the cameras and the crowds, Freddie received news that would destroy most people. 3 words that changed everything. You have AIDS. At that time, AIDS was a death sentence. There was no cure, no hope, just a countdown. Can you imagine that moment? Can you imagine hearing those words and knowing your time is running out? Most people would have walked away. Most people would have given up, hidden away, waited for the end. But Freddie Mercury was not most people. He made a choice that day, a choice that would define his legacy forever. He chose to live. Not just exist, but truly live. Here's what's incredible. After his diagnosis, Freddie didn't slow down. He sped up. He worked harder. He created more. It was as if he knew time was precious and he refused to waste a single second. In 1986, just after learning his fate, Queen embarked on what would be their final tour, the Magic Tour. 150,000 people gathered at Knebworth Park for what nobody knew would be Freddie's last major concert. Picture this. You're dying inside, but outside you're giving everything. Every note, every movement, every ounce of energy. That's courage. That's Freddie. Nobody in that crowd knew. Nobody suspected. He hid his pain behind his performance, behind his smile, behind his voice. And he was magnificent. But here's where the story gets even more powerful. After the tour ended, Freddie could have retired quietly. He could have spent his remaining time resting, preparing for the end. Instead, he went straight into the recording studio. Think about that for a moment. A man who knows he's dying chooses to spend his final years creating. Not for money, he had plenty. Not for fame, he was already a legend. He did it because music was his life. It was his oxygen. It was his reason to wake up every morning. Between 1989 and 1991, while his body was deteriorating, Freddie recorded 2 complete albums with Queen, the Innuendo album and tracks for what would become Made in Heaven, released after his death. Let me tell you what those recording sessions were like. His bandmates, Brian May, Roger Taylor, and John Deacon, they knew. They saw him getting weaker. They watched the disease take its toll. Some days Freddie could barely stand. Some days the pain was unbearable. But he would show up every single day. Brian May later said something that still gives me chills. Freddie would come into the studio, looking terrible, feeling terrible. We'd ask if he wanted to rest. And he'd say, "I'll rest when I'm dead. Now, give me the lyrics. I'll do it." Can you feel that? Can you feel the determination, the refusal to surrender? There's one recording session that perfectly captures who Freddie was in those final days. It's the story behind one of Queen's most powerful songs, "The Show Must Go On." Brian May wrote this song in 1990. When he brought it to Freddie, he was worried. The song required incredible vocal power, hitting notes that would challenge even a healthy singer, and Freddie was far from healthy. Brian hesitated. He looked at Freddie, so frail, so weak, and wondered if asking him to sing this was too much. Do you know what Freddie did? He looked at Brian, grabbed a glass of vodka, drank it down in one gulp, and said, "I'll do it, darling. Don't worry about me." Then he went into that recording booth and delivered one of the most powerful vocal performances of his entire career, in one take, while dying. Listen to that song. Really listen to it. You can hear everything in his voice, the pain, the defiance, the absolute refusal to give up. Every note is a statement. I'm still here. I'm still fighting. I'm still alive. The lyrics say it all. Inside, my heart is breaking. My makeup may be flaking, but my smile still stays on. That was Freddie's life in those final years. Breaking inside, but smiling outside. Dying privately, but living publicly with everything he had.
But here's what many people don't know about those recording sessions. As Freddie got sicker, he could no longer stand for long periods, so he recorded sitting down, sometimes lying down. His voice, once capable of 4 octaves, was shrinking. His body was betraying him. Yet he kept going. There were days when he'd finish a vocal take and immediately need medical attention. Days when the pain was so intense that tears would stream down his face between songs. Days when his bandmates would beg him to rest. His answer was always the same. Keep the tape rolling. I want to sing while I still can. Think about what that means. Think about the love for music that drives someone to push through that kind of suffering. That's not just dedication, that's devotion. That's a man who found his purpose and refused to let go, even when everything else was slipping away. By early 1991, Freddie could barely leave his home. The medications, the treatments, nothing was working. He knew the end was near. Most artists would have stopped recording, but Freddie had one final mission. He called his bandmates and told them something extraordinary. Write me songs. Write me as many songs as you can. I'm going to sing everything you bring me. I want to leave you as much as possible to work with after I'm gone. Can you imagine? A dying man thinking about his legacy, about his friends, about what he could leave behind. Brian, Roger, and John brought him song after song, and Freddie sang them all. Some days his voice was strong, other days it was barely a whisper. But he sang. He recorded vocals for songs that would appear on albums released years after his death. Songs he knew he'd never hear the final versions of. Songs he'd never perform live. He sang them anyway. Because that's what artists do. They create. Not for applause or recognition, but because it's who they are. In September 1991, Freddie made his last public appearance. Not on stage, not at a concert, just a brief moment caught by photographers outside his home. He was so thin, so frail, that many people didn't recognize him. The press went crazy. Rumors about his health had been circulating for years, but Freddie had always denied them. Now, seeing him like this, the world knew something was terribly wrong. Still, he said nothing. He wanted to control his narrative until the very end. On November 23, 1991, Freddie finally made a public statement. After years of silence, he acknowledged the truth. I have been diagnosed with AIDS. I felt it was time to tell you all because the press speculation was causing harm to those around me. Even then, even in his final statement, he was thinking about others. About protecting his loved ones from the media frenzy. The next day, November 24, 1991, at 7 p.m., Freddie Mercury died at his home in London. He was 45 years old. The world mourned. Millions of fans couldn't believe it. This giant of rock music, this life-larger-than-life performer, was gone. But here's the thing about Freddie's story that makes it so powerful, so important, so absolutely unforgettable. He didn't just die. He lived. Really, truly lived right up until the end. While his body was failing, his spirit never did. While the disease was winning, he never surrendered. He sang, he created, he loved, he fought. And that's the real story here. Not the tragedy of AIDS, not the sadness of a life cut short. The story is about the triumph of the human spirit over impossible circumstances. Freddie Mercury showed us something profound in those final years. He showed us that life isn't about how long you live, it's about what you do with the time you have. He could have spent his last years in self-pity. He could have been angry, bitter, resentful. Instead, he chose joy. He chose creativity. He chose to give the world everything he had left. After his death, the remaining members of Queen released the album Made in Heaven in 1995. Every vocal on that album was Freddie's, recorded during his final years. The album cover shows Freddie's statue overlooking Lake Geneva, one hand reaching towards heaven. It was beautiful. It was heartbreaking. It was perfect. Listening to those songs, knowing the circumstances under which they were recorded, is an emotional experience. You hear a man singing about love, loss, and hope while staring death in the face. You hear vulnerability and strength in equal measure. One song in particular stands out. It's called Mother Love. It was the last song Freddie ever recorded. He sang most of it, but the final verse remained unfinished. He was too weak to complete it. Brian May later sang that final verse in Freddie's place. It was the only time in Queen's history that anyone other than Freddie sang lead vocals on a studio track. Freddie left the studio that day knowing he might not return. And he didn't. Mother Love was his goodbye.
But you know what? Even incomplete, even cut short, that song is perfect. Because it's real. It's honest. It's Freddie giving us everything until he physically couldn't anymore. That's the legacy. That's what we should remember. Not the sadness, not the disease, not the tragedy. We should remember the courage, the passion, the absolute refusal to let circumstances define him. Freddie Mercury was diagnosed with a terminal illness and responded by creating some of the most powerful music of his career. He was told he was dying and decided to live more intensely than most people do in perfect health. He taught us something crucial. You are not your circumstances. You are your choices. He chose to sing. He chose to create. He chose to love. He chose to live. And because of those choices, his voice still echoes today. His music still moves millions. His story still inspires. Freddie Mercury died on November 24, 1991, but in a very real sense, he's still alive. Every time someone plays a Queen song, he's alive. Every time his story inspires someone to keep fighting, he's alive. Every time someone chooses courage over fear, he's alive. That's the power of living fully. That's the gift Freddie gave us. So the next time you face something difficult, something that seems impossible, remember Freddie. Remember a man who sang until his last breath. Remember someone who turned tragedy into triumph through sheer force of will. Remember that life isn't about the hand you're dealt. It's about how you play it. Freddie Mercury was dealt a terrible hand, and he played it magnificently. He showed us that even in our darkest moments, even when everything seems lost, we have a choice. We can give up, or we can show up. We can surrender, or we can sing. Freddie chose to sing. Until his very last breath, he chose to sing. And that choice, that beautiful, courageous, defiant choice, changed the world. The show did go on. It's still going on. Every day, someone discovers Queen for the first time. Every day, someone finds strength in Freddie's story. Every day, his legacy grows. Because true legends don't die, they transform. They become something bigger than themselves. They become inspiration.
They become hope. They become proof that the human spirit is stronger than any disease, any obstacle, any limitation. Freddie Mercury was a man, flawed, vulnerable, scared at times, just like the rest of us. But he was also something more. He was a testament to what's possible when you refuse to let fear win. His final years weren't a sad ending. They were the final movement in a symphony that will play forever. So yes, Freddie Mercury died young. Yes, it was tragic. Yes, we lost him too soon. But we didn't lose what matters most. We didn't lose his music. We didn't lose his message. We didn't lose his example. We have all of that forever. And that's not a tragedy. That's a victory. Freddie Mercury performed until his last breath. He loved until his last breath. He created until his last breath. He lived until his last breath. Can any of us hope for more than that? Can any of us ask for a better example of how to face the impossible? I don't think so. Freddie's gone, but his voice remains. His courage remains. His lesson remains. Live fully, love deeply, create constantly, never surrender. That was Freddie's way. That was his gift to us. And if we honor that gift, if we live by that example, then Freddie Mercury will never truly die. He'll live forever, in every note, every song, every person who chooses courage over fear. That's the real story. That's the truth about Freddie Mercury's final years. Not a story of death, but a story of life. Incredible, beautiful, unstoppable life. Until the very last breath.